Hi, Daphne Goodyear here with the fifth in a series of videos about the memoir that my mother wrote after being interned in Shanghai, China by the Japanese during World War II. Life in concentration camp, as everyone can well imagine, was harsh and horrible, especially when you'd had a very charmed life. After all, Shanghai in those days was like the Paris of the East, and my parents absolutely loved their life in Shanghai. And then Pearl Harbor was bombed, and the Japs took over, and everything in their life changed at that moment. But there were some silver linings, and the silver linings are this: the friendships that were made in concentration camp ended up lasting a lifetime. And that was such a positive bonus for all the heartache and torture that my parents experienced being in concentration camps and being separated and not knowing whether they'd ever see one another again. But one of my favorite and one of my twin sisters' favorite was a gentleman named Bob Johnson. But that was not his real name. His real name was Edgar Whitcomb. He was remarkable. He fooled the Japanese into believing he was a civil engineer for a mining company, not an American soldier. He fought in the Philippines. He was captured by the Japanese, escaped, then recaptured again. Then he was transferred to Shanghai and placed in the same concentration camp as we were, Cheetah. I can tell you without a doubt, he was a favorite friend of my twin sister and me in camp because he was just wonderful with children. And we were little tiny ones, but every time we saw him in the hall, we'd run our little legs down to see him and wrap our arms around his knees because we weren't very big. But he loved playing with us. This picture here is with my twin sister and me with Bob. Well, I should say Edgar Whitcomb after the war. And can't you see his mischievousness? He's got his hands under my chin. I know he's going to tickle me like crazy. Oh, he was a wonderful man. The sad part about this story is during my mother's lifetime, she never told me about Robert Johnson. I never knew him until sorting through my mother's memorabilia after her death. By sheer coincidence, I realized in a conversation with some friends of mine from Indianapolis, Indiana, that Bob Johnson and Edgar Whitcomb were the same person. To my deep sadness, they informed me that Edgar Whitcomb had just died 2 months before. Therefore, a reunion was no longer possible. I adored this man, and I would just give it anything to have met up with him as an adult, because I'm sure he had a lot of stories to tell that even my mother didn't remember. And I don't know why my mother didn't tell me about him, but she didn't. But it was unbelievably heartbreaking to miss the chance for a reunion with this friend of 2-year-olds, the governor of Indiana, and just one courageous and remarkable human being. And if you haven't read his book, Escape from Corregidor, you've got to read it. That is one of the most unbelievable books in courage and fortitude and ingenuity that I have ever read. I love the book from beginning to the end, so go get it if you possibly can. And if you're interested in Escape from Corregidor. Other friends in the camp that were special to my parents were a couple named Carl and Shelly Maidan. Carl became a globe-trotting photojournalist after the war, working for Life magazine, among many others. During World War II, he and his wife Shelly, also a reporter, were on assignment in the Philippines when they were captured by the Japanese. The couple was first interned in San Tomas internment camp in Manila. Then they were transferred to where we were at Cheetah in Shanghai. He ran our concentration camp's newspaper, perfectly named the Assembly Times. After repatriation, the Maidans continued to cover the war. Among the most famous photographs taken by Carl was that of General Douglas MacArthur wading ashore at Luzon in the Philippines, honoring his 1942 promise to return. Another couple that was dear to our hearts was Nina and Carl Mulder. They were friends of my family's before concentration camp and remained lifelong friends. After the war, they settled in Bronxville, New York. My parents saw them on a regular basis. The Mulders never had children, so guess what? They spoiled us like crazy. Every time we'd see them, they'd have stacks of presents for my twin sister and me, whether we went to visit them in Bronxville or whether they came to visit us. And here's a picture of them. This is Carl here. This is Nina. This is my dearly beloved father and my sweet maternal grandmother sitting in front of our house in Shanghai. Anyway, their friendship lasted till they all died. It was a wonderful, wonderful and special friendship. Another remarkable couple that was in camp with my mother at Cheetah were Carl and Shelly Maidans. Carl was a Life magazine photographer, reporter, and his wife was also a reporter. And they were in the Philippines when they got thrown into Santo Tomas concentration camp in Manila. Then eventually they were transferred over to our camp, Cheetah Civilian Assembly Camp in Shanghai. Carl was an absolutely amazing reporter, and he actually ran the camp newspaper called the Assembly Times. And he had a lot of good reporting to do in that paper. After repatriation, the Maidans continued to cover the war. Among the most famous photos that Carl took was that of MacArthur wading ashore at Luzon in the Philippines, honoring his 1942 promise to return to the Filipino people. So they were a remarkable couple and great friends, and they went on to live an incredible life after the war. Another couple that was in this book that I could not find a thing about. I looked and looked all over the internet. I researched them every which way to Sunday, and I could not find anything on Billy and Cheetah Carroll. I wish I had a picture of them because they, from what you'll read in the book, they look like such an interesting, extraordinary couple. My mother came to know them well, and all the internees look forward to their performances. They do these impromptu shows, and I think it was definitely one of the highlights of camp life. But I wish I could have found out more about them. They just seem like such a special couple. So there you have it. Those are just a few of the people that I've highlighted here about their lives and the friendships that my mother made in camp, and they were all near and dear to her. So this is a historical document, and I hope you'll enjoy every single word that you read about the experiences, because it was a remarkable time in history, and this is definitely a historical document. And I'm sure that it'll be very difficult for you to put yourself in the shoes of my mother as she went through such an amazing time in history, from the glamorous days of Shanghai to be having absolutely nothing and being nothing. But it's a remarkable story in which she triumphed in the end. And you can buy it. There's a link in the description here on YouTube. Hope you'll enjoy it.